Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for an opportunity to present today. We are here to present a guide to effective email communication. My name is Andrew Triplett. I am the Director of Consulting here at TouchPoint Software. It's my job to come alongside our church partners and work closely with them on whatever their initiatives may be and use TouchPoint and use the software effectively to enact ministry. So that's what I do. Joining me are Chris Dolan. I'm going to step aside and let Chris introduce himself real quick.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Dolan, and based out of the New York City area, and I oversee product and strategy, which basically means I work closely with our developers to add simple, easy to use features and functionality to make TouchPoint strong and help serve our church partners well. And I'll turn it over to Katie to let her introduce herself.
Hey there, I'm Katie Wilson, and I am the marketing coordinator for TouchPoint. So I just help out with anything marketing needs.
All right, so a little bit of housekeeping before we dive in here. You are probably very familiar with Zoom by this point in 2021, but as you have questions, as things come up throughout our presentation today, we will have time at the end for some Q&A. So please go ahead and submit any questions that you might have as we're walking through it. Brief agenda before we dive in here, just to give you a lay of the land. We're going to start by talking about the three types of emails. There are actually three different types of emails that we want you to be familiar with that'll help frame our conversation today. From there, we're going to talk about 5 best practices, being mobile responsiveness, branding, personalized emails, calls to action, email footers, and like I said, we will have time there at the end for Q&A. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Chris, and he's going to discuss the 3 types of emails.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. And we thought it was really important to actually start here because most people actually try or look at emails all as the same. And really, it's a dangerous thing because there are certain things that you need to optimize in certain emails, and the ways that you communicate and things like footers and there's some other elements that are really important to talk about in how the different emails are kind of set up and managed. So let's dive into those. The first type is a transactional email. This is pretty straightforward. This is something like an automated receipt, some kind of a registration confirmation, maybe a volunteer commitment. These are the things that when somebody takes an action, this is an automatic thing that happens in response to that action. And so these are usually kind of one-to-one. I make a gift, I get a receipt. Pretty straightforward, and we'll talk about some ways that some of these best practices apply specifically to that. But in number 2, this is what a lot of the emails that you send through a typical, whatever your email platform is, whether you're in Office 365 or G Suite, these are based on a relationship. I am on a team with these people. That could be I'm in some kind of a small group or a community group with these people. Maybe I serve together with these people. It's based on you knowing these people and being connected. The third type is subscription-based emails. And I want to clarify between relationship-based and subscription-based. Sometimes people say, yeah, I am a part of this large organization with these people, so it's a relationship-based. But if that relationship is not tight enough that you can clearly define what that relationship is, most of the mass emails that you send typically fall into this third category, which is subscription-based emails. And that's what we're going to be talking about mostly here, but we will talk about some of the first and second category. But I think it's important to distinguish between the two, and particularly around some of the rules around footer and other things as we dive into this. So these emails are very different, and it's dangerous because the temptation or what happens often is that people lump categories 2 and 3 together into one category, and that's something we just need to be aware of, and we'll talk about that more. So let me turn it over to sorry, is it
That's
Andrew?
me.
Katie, sorry for number 1.
Oh, So let's talk about mobile responsiveness. When we say mobile responsiveness, we mean it's important to create emails for the purpose of being read on a mobile-friendly device. So if we go to the next slide, we can see that more than half of emails are opened on mobile devices, which I'm sure is not really that surprising to any of us, especially now. So that's imperative that emails we send look good and that they're easy to read on a mobile device. So sort of think about what your church does, and maybe even go into your analytics and see if you can find where your congregants are spending most of their time reading your emails. Is it on a desktop computer or is it on their mobile device? And I'm sure you'll also find that it's probably going to be mobile. Then we can see on the next slide an example of a template. So Amazon actually accidentally emailed out their template over a year ago. And this is great for us because we can see a really good example of what a mobile responsive template can be. So we see here that this is visually pleasing. We see at the very top, we have the Amazon header, and then right underneath, we have that header sort of banner image. And they even have the specs in there. So this is probably a really good template to go through of that 600 by 200 pixel size. And this means that it's an attention grabbing banner, but it's not going to be too overwhelming when someone opens up that email and just sees an image. They'll see the text underneath. Next, we can see that this headline, oh, sorry, if you go back, we can see that the headline holds the most valuable space for this email, and it summarizes the whole purpose of that email. And the quality of this headline actually will determine if that reader continues reading or not. We see that underneath the copy flows and its melody is created when it's broken up into different sections, and we see that the email itself is fairly concise. We also notice that this is a single column email, meaning that it's not really like a web page where you would see maybe multiple columns. We just see that one, which makes it really easy to scroll. And then we notice at the very bottom of this template that there is a call to action button. And if you notice within that button, they even say, do not write, like click here. You want to make sure that you're actually using a true call to action, like let's start a new project together, join free for a month, follow the magic, something like that. So we can now move on to the next slide. And I believe this is, yeah.
Back to me.
Yep.
So for those of you that are looking for a little bit of inspiration, looking to see what some of the Fortune 500 companies, how they're doing it, kind of like Amazon, there's a really cool website out there, not affiliated with TouchPoint, but we want to point it out. It's called reallygoodemails.com. Very clever URL there, reallygoodemails.com. But you can go there and just start taking a look at what some of these guys are doing. You're going to see some Fortune 500s in there. You're going to see software companies and how they have approached their email strategy. And a few things that I want to point out. These were just a couple. I could have grabbed a million of these, but these were just a couple that jumped out to me. And I want to point out why these were interesting. First, starting on the left there, Sonos, and then there's two in the middle that are for Chipotle, and then a third on the end, which I'm not sure what the company was, but it has something to do with shaving. I think it might have been Dollar Shave Club, something like that. But what you'll notice about each of these is that they're very image driven. Now, I want to be clear here, they're not only images, because that's bad practice. I think we'll talk about that a little bit later on, but they are heavily image driven. In fact, the amount of words that are on the page, particularly in the first three, starting from the left there, the amount of words that are on the page is really not many. I think by now, all of us know that emails we get a lot of emails every single day. We get emails at work, we get emails in our personal account, and you don't read all of them. So being able to be concise, to the point, and get that point across quickly. And then, like Katie was talking about just a moment ago, having a clear, interesting call to action, not just click here. Each one of these has a call to action that is very clear. Sonos, shop now. Chipotle, start your order, find your order. And then the Shave Club there on the right, redeem a trial. One other thing I want you to log away for a topic that we'll come back to in a few moments is that Chipotle example there, that the third one from the left, it says, join us and support Tennessee tornado victims. When I was first grabbing these screenshots, this was around the time that we were having some tornadoes here in Tennessee. So it was a very timely email. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on, but I just want you to kind of log that away for now. One thing that I do want to mention is within TouchPoint, we have kind of this concept of an email builder. And you can see here just a real quick screenshot of what that builder looks like. It has kind of those drag and drop components, or dragging a text area into the email builder. So it really makes it really, really simple for anyone to create these. You might look at those templates on reallygoodemails.com and get a little bit intimidated because they do look so good. Obviously, professionals have done that, and you probably have professionals at your church, but then some of our church partners, they don't have a marketing team with a big budget. And so they think, how can I accomplish that? Well, hopefully we can provide the tools that can help you do that with just really clean, easy to produce emails. Okay. All right. So
I might inject one thing here real quick. So, Katie mentioned emails being one column. That is a really important thing on mobile because it's easy to read, right? When you have two columns, and the text or whatever the image is becomes too small. But there's a temptation to do emails with multiple columns, and it's okay if you're using a mobile responsive email builder, which is really key. Because if that email is opened up on a non-mobile device, it's okay to display multiple columns because you have more real estate and it's easy to read those. But it's important to basically use a tool that allows you to optimize the email based on what type of device you're using. And so that's what Andrew's pointing out here. You'll see one of the drag and drops here is to add columns. But if you're on a mobile device, those columns will then stack, and having a preview where you can see, is that email easy to read and easy to digest on a mobile device. So really important.
I'm going to hand it back to Katie to talk about branding.
Yeah, so we have talked a lot about what happens when your email is opened, but let's talk about what gets your email open. So if you don't mind going actually to the next one. So the strongest influence on email open rates actually is who the sender is that you are sending as. So if the reader knows who you are or who that sender is, they're most likely to open that email because they trust you. And then the content, of course, more than half of people say, like we have spoken about before, we want that content to be a little more concise. We want to make sure that they're actually reading this email and getting through it and not seeing that there is so much text that they're overwhelmed and they kind of want to exit out of that email. And then if we look on to the next slide, we see what the least influence, what has the least influence on open email rates. So surprisingly, the subject line, so only 37% of people say that subject line has a strong influence on their decision to open. So their decision probably will rely on who the email is coming from over what's the content about. Of course, it's nice to put that in there. So we want to make sure that subject has, it's alluding to what your email is, but don't spend a ton of time worrying about that perfect subject line rather than the content. And then the time of day, this is also a little less influential than what you would think, but there are still a couple of important things to think about. So we want to make sure that we're seeing emails at times that people are reading emails. So we probably don't want to send an email around commute times. And we also probably want to make sure that it is not during a time where they would be typically browsing the internet on their own. So let's think more sort of inside of the daytime. And then when we were doing things that we send out pretty often, such as newsletters, we should make sure that we're keeping that pretty consistent. So if you're sending out a newsletter right after lunch at 1 p.m., make sure that you're sending that newsletter out at the same time so people are expecting around what time to see your newsletter come into their inbox. And then if we go to the next slide, let's talk about the actual branding within the email. So we want to make sure that when someone opens your email, it should be easy to identify that it is your church or organization. And you don't want to make that recipient search for the info of who the sender is. So that's why it is really important to just make sure that either your header or somewhere really early on that it has your branding on it. And then we also want to talk about who is that sender of the email. So emails are generally, they should come from that same address, or they should be recognizable of that person or ministry. So when you are thinking of different church organizations, let's think about the size of your staff. So if you're a smaller organization, you can probably just go ahead and send from one single sender, and they will always recognize that sender and be able to open that email. If you're a larger organization, it's probably better to have one sender per ministry. And then along with that, they're knowing exactly what ministry that email is coming from as well. And you can see that example right there on the slide. And then if you want to personalize the emails, you can go ahead and send from your church email address. And then, yes, we're going on to the next slide. So when we're adding images into our emails, we want to make sure we're adding a little more than the image. We want to put that text in there as well. And this is really helpful for if someone is opening up your email, but maybe for one reason or another, their images aren't loading, at least they'll know what the content is in there. So if they see that there is a header, or if they see that this image has, it has to do with a vacation Bible school sign up or something like that, they'll at least know what that content was supposed to be. And let's keep that consistency among sent emails. So we want to make sure that those fonts and colors are the same and that they're recognizable within your brand. We want that logo to remain consistent. So if it's coming from different ministries, we can definitely change up whatever ministry it's coming from, but we want to make sure that when we choose one, we're keeping that consistent, so we're not confusing the reader. And then we want to make sure that our lingo or our language remains consistent as well. So if we say community groups, we keep that as community groups, or if we say small groups, we keep that as small groups, but we're not kind of switching up between the two to make sure people truly are understanding that message that we want to come across.
Yeah, one thing that I'll add there is going back to Chris's 3 types of email: transactional, relational, and subscription-based. It's even more imperative that you keep that consistency through all 3 types. You think about something like a transactional email that is, a transactional email again is sent out anytime that a gift is given or that we've registered for an event, something like that. And if we receive a transactional email that doesn't have a logo, it doesn't have kind of that look and feel of the rest of your branding, then the recipient might not feel at ease. Did I give to the right place? Did I register for the right event? At the right church? There's only 100 different churches called the Hills, or whatever the case may be. So just having that consistency to give the confidence to the reader that they're reading something from the organization that they want to be a part of. Okay. So moving on to best practice number 3, personalize. This is where it's important to again give people confidence that they are receiving an email from an institution or an organization that they recognize. something like a replacement code that says, hi, it doesn't just say to whom it may concern or hi friend, something like that, but a replacement code that's going to pull in the individual's first name whenever possible to go ahead and use a feature like that. In TouchPoint, we have the concept of what we call a special link. A special link is particularly useful and helpful in a registration or a giving scenario. If our call to action is to please register for this event, we have a concept in TouchPoint where that special link takes the individual to the registration page, already knowing who they are. We can link that email to the individual's data record within the database, so that when they go to the registration page, we already know their first name, last name, email address, probably phone number, probably mailing address, and in some cases, we might even have stored their payment information if they've given to us in the past. So utilizing those special links and making it as easy as possible to move through the giving and registration process. Speaking of making things easy, deep linking. Let me define a deep link real quick. This might be, some of you are probably aware of this, others, this might be a new concept. A deep link is a special type of link that is smart enough to know when someone is on their mobile device. If someone clicks on this link or taps on the link from a mobile device, it takes them to the mobile app, to your institution, your church's mobile app. If you don't, or if they haven't downloaded the mobile app yet, it will take them to the Play Store or the iOS store, so they can go ahead and download that. So that's a great way to drive people, drive adoption of your mobile app, is to just when, hey, you're on the mobile device already, let's go ahead and get that app so that we can send you to it. And then in the TouchPoint mobile application, it's a really, really nice tool because, again, it knows who the individual is. They log in one time and they really don't have to log in after that. If they go to registration from the app, we know who they are. They've already logged in, so they don't have to log in again to give us first and last name information, address information, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, intentional content. You know, I talked a moment ago, I actually kind of logged away that email from Chipotle about the tornadoes in Tennessee. So that email only went out to individuals in the affected area. So being intentional with who is receiving these emails, even in a subscription scenario. I mean, obviously, that's going to happen in a relational email, because that's the men's ministry or the women's ministry, something like that. But even in a subscription scenario, taking the time to make sure that your content is specific to the audience, and we're not just spraying out information to people who might not need that information. Obviously, if Chipotle sends you an email that says, hey, we're working with tornado victims in Tennessee and you're in California, then it's less likely that individual is going to open up that email from Chipotle next time, right? Another word on special links, like I said, just making it as easy as possible for the end user. If the call to action is something like a registration or a giving scenario, TouchPoint, we have this concept of special links. You can see them there on the screen. I talked about register links. Some other ones that we have that are really kind of cool are RSVP links, which it just gives the individual, is like the most simple registration form of all time. Are you coming? Yes or no? They click a link and boom, they're done. And then we even have the concept of vote links as well. So vote on, our Sunday school class is going to start a new series. Would you like to learn more about Genesis or learn more about the Gospels? Click here to vote. So making that as easy as possible. Deep linking, like I was saying, the ability to know whether someone is on the mobile device or on a desktop. What I didn't mention about that is, like I said, the link is smart. It knows what device you're on, and if you're on a web device or a PC or desktop, it's going to take you to the browser, like you're seeing there on the lower right hand side. All right, and then finally, personalizing that email. I talked about replacement codes, the ability to pull in that information. This is actually from our newsletter that we send out monthly. It says, hi, Katie. So we're not just saying, dear friend, we're making that a little bit more personal to that individual. All right. And so with that, I'm going to hand it to Chris to talk about calls to action.
All right. So calls to action. This, I would argue maybe one of the most, if not the most important thing, and it kind of touches on a lot of what Katie and Andrew and I've already been talking about. Why it's important is because we're not just communicating for the sake of communication. We are communicating because we want somebody to respond in some way, whether that is making a donation to your organization or engaging in some new way. We're not just trying to get information out. Often we're trying to provoke some kind of an action. And so it's really important, as Andrew just mentioned, in some of the ways you can personalize those calls to action to make it as easy as possible for someone to respond. When Katie was talking earlier about the sender in around branding, people know what organizations are sending information that is easy to respond to. And so if you have a reputation for sending things and it's hard to respond, people are going to be less likely to click on those things. So making it easy. And there's other things that are really relevant to that. If we move on to the next slide, what are some of the other influences for conversions or click-throughs? Probably the biggest one on this next slide, and I've grouped these together, is content. And yes, offers and promotions, they say, is the most influential factor, but I really think that relates to content, because if you read what it says in there, it must bring value to the recipient. What does that mean? That means we're not just, as Andrew said, kind of blanketly spraying information and hoping that people get something. We're trying to send relevant, important content that is of value to the recipient. And that ties in very closely what Katie was talking about with branding, right? If you're known to send relevant content that's going to be engaging and interesting and worth somebody's time to read and respond to, then they're going to be more likely to not only open your email, but they're going to be more likely to click through and engage further with your content. Really important. And the best way you can do this is through segmentation. I think last month, the topic might have actually been on this. And segmentation, for those, if you missed last month or you're not familiar with it, it's basically the idea and Andrew talked about this, right? Chipotle, they probably have a mailing list of people all over the country. And the really cool thing is they're collecting data. They know where people live. So they're not sending that email to everybody in the country. They're sending that email about the Texas tornado to only people in that geographic region because it's relevant to them and it's not relevant to other people in the country. And so Chipotle is stewarding the data that they have been entrusted with in a really great way, right? We have to, our constituents entrust us with their data, and we have to steward that and use it to communicate to the right people. Good communication is sending the right message to the right person. And so that is one of the best ways that you can get your emails opened. And it's also one of the best ways that you can get your calls to action responded to. We'll take that one step further on the next slide. I've been talking about this, but your emails have to be relevant. Everybody's probably, you know, if you're like me, you probably are subscribed to so many different things. You get so many emails and you click through and you know, okay, I'm not going to read this email because it's not going to be relevant. It's the same thing that I get every week from this organization, or they're not really adding anything new or of value. So you just click through and, you know, sometimes the subject line might be about something that is relevant. And that's where I would say, to Katie's point, like, subject could be important. If you're sending too many messages, then the subject line really matters, right? Because then people can use it to weed out what is relevant and what is important. But they shouldn't have to do that. They should know that everything that your organization is sending them is relevant. It has critical information and key things that are going to serve them well. So those are the two of the other strongest influences. Taking it one more level, the studies show that one of the things that has the least influence on clicks is something that actually we often think has the most, which is maybe the brand of the sender. We spend a lot of time on making the email look pretty, and not that that's not important. And I would actually say the brand that I would say is more important is actually the brand of the actual sender, meaning like who the email is coming from, than actually making the email look pretty or beautiful. Because the reputation of the sender, and maybe that's what I'd call it, is the reputation of the sender less so than the brand of the sender. And then link optimization. Studies have shown that it actually has less of an influence where you put that link. I know best practice is usually to put it in the top part of the email where it's quick and easy to respond to. But if your content is engaging and it's something that people, it's important and relevant to them, they will click on those links. Studies have shown regardless of where that link falls on the page. You do want to make it easy, and you want the call to action to be something relevant. And we had examples of that, and Andrew pointed that out. Katie mentioned, I think, at the beginning, you don't want to say click here. You want to actually have that call to action be something that talks about what you're trying to get them to do. So really key here.
All right, and then last but not least, last of the best practices that we're going to talk about is the email footer. And we did want to spend just a minute talking about this. This is kind of a lot of times the forgotten section of the email, because obviously it's at the bottom, and if it's a longer email, a lot of people might not even get to the bottom, so you're not going to spend a ton of time on it. But I did want to talk about a few things in relation to it. So first, it does depend on what type of email it is. That's going to affect the content in the footer. But by and large, you're going to want to have a reason for why the individual received the email. So you are receiving this email because you are subscribed to this list, or you are one of our donors. You're one of our valued donors, so you are receiving this email. Something to that effect, so that people have a clear idea as to, this is not spam. I'm receiving this for a reason. It does need to have a way to not receive it anymore. This is really, really important. It has to have an unsubscribe link of some variety, whether it takes them to a page where they can manage their subscriptions on different lists, something of that nature. If you don't have this, people will mark it as spam. And the more times you're marked as spam, you probably know, the more times you're marked as spam, the lower your deliverability rate goes, because your reputation goes down. And then finally, obviously, some of this is a little bit of a no-brainer, I'm sure, but the organization name and the physical mailing address, having that in the footer, so that it's clear that you are a physical entity and people know who you are. And
Yeah,
Chris, that's a bonus tip here.
One last little bonus tip, and I see this as probably a common thing, especially amongst churches, but the bigger your organization is, or the more complex it is, the more important this is, because as I said earlier, your constituents are entrusting you with data, and you want to be respectful of that. And what that means is you really want to have one channel for where those emails are coming from. And why that's important is because if you're sending emails that are not relevant and people are trying to manage their email preferences, if you're sending through several different systems, they can't go in one place and manage that. And then people get frustrated. And not only then do they feel like, their permissions are not being respected, but then they're frustrated because they can't control it and manage it. And so I see this very often in churches, and this is one of the things that we love to come alongside and partner with churches, because we can send our emails and help churches manage all the different ministries, as opposed to, various ministries having their own kind of channel for sending those communications. It also helps you look back and see the history all in one place of what emails are being sent out, so that you can see, like, are you sending too many emails? Are you respecting people? And from a troubleshooting standpoint, if people are saying, hey, I should be getting this, or I should be getting this, or whatever, it's helpful to have that all in one place where it can be managed. So just a little bonus tip there. If your organization is using more than one, CRM, CHMS, email service, like a Constant Contact or MailChimp, different accounts like that, if you're using more than one of those, I would strongly encourage you to consolidate those and have different lists that people can opt in and opt out on based on the various arms or branches of your organization.
All right. Katie?
All right, so we're going to go ahead and open up questions. And I know that there's already a couple in here that I think are going to be really good questions to start us off with. And so if you don't know, we talked about it at the beginning, but just in that bottom right middle section is the Q&A button to go ahead and ask a question. And so we did get one a little earlier, and it says, how many emails a month can I send out? And this is from Jamie, and it says, we're a Christian nonprofit. We send out one blog a week, but how many emails are we sending out for fundraisers, et cetera?
Yeah, this is a great question. Andrew, you probably get this a lot doing consulting. I'll take it, and then maybe you can elaborate if you want. I'm not going to give you an answer, basically. The answer is, it's not about how many, it's about your emails being relevant and engaging and respecting people. So if you're, and the best example of that is if you have an email that you really think is urgent and needs to go out, the best thing you can do is segment and figure out who is the most important person for that to receive that email, and segment your list and only send it to those people. So instead of blanketly sending every email to every person, try to tailor your emails as much as you can to your audience so that they're relevant and engaging and important. I don't know much about your organization, but you mentioned that it's a blog post. Like, are your blog posts engaging and serving your constituents? If so, like, lead with that content, have that in your emails. People like to receive thought-provoking, thought leadership content, but make it relevant to the people, basically, is the way I'd answer that. Andrew, you want to elaborate anymore?
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. That is exactly right. And Jamie, I'm sure it's a bit frustrating. You might have been looking for like a 2 or 3 or something like that. And the fact of the matter is, you know your organization better than us, so you're going to know your constituents and the people that you're communicating with better than us. What I might add, what I might say to that, and Chris alluded to this, is just kind of using that concept of segmentation. So if you're sending out that blog post once a month, that's great. That's kind of your subscription model of emails. But then as you're soliciting funds and asking for donations, that sort of thing, that's where the relational emails can really come in handy. So using good segmentation practices, segmenting by things, just again, off the top of my head here, segmenting by things like people who have never given, people who have given one time, and people who have given many times. And you can have a different tailored message to each one of those. So kind of using that concept of segmentation to do everything outside of the blog posts.
Yeah, Andrew, I might even say those are great examples of segmentation. If your organization is serving different different purposes, finding out what is relevant to that purpose and segmenting your communications around giving to those purposes as well. So not only how they give, like whether they're a one-time giver, maybe a frequent giver, maybe they've never given. We see that churches that communicate to their givers based on what they know about them, based on how they've given, and also what ministries they're involved in, they see much higher response rates than the churches and ministries that basically just send one email communication that is blanket to all people. Much higher open rates, much higher responses in that. So really key. One other thing I wanted to mention that I usually mention around the 3 different types of emails. I often forget this. That first email category that we mentioned, which is the transactional email. I like to call that's like your free touch, right? It's very rare that you get a free touch with your constituents. Usually, sending out a relationship-based email or sending out a subscription-based email, you do want to limit those. You don't want to send too many, but that transactional email is a free touch because they took an action, so you have to take that action to respond to them. So make those as engaging as possible. Don't just include receipt information or whatever the response is, like thank you for your gift. tell them how their gift is impacting, you know, your local area, or whatever, you know, whatever your organization serves, right? If they're engaging in an event, tell them other ways that they can engage, like through social media or other things like that. Don't just make your emails that are transactional truly just transactional. Those are free touches that you have with people, and you want to make those emails as engaging as possible and really relevant to the person as well. So you should think about those, even the transactional emails, the same way as you're doing the other emails.
And yeah, I think that's really good advice. And Jamie also asked, what's the best time and day to send? And I think we kind of touched on this for a moment, but I think it's good to think about the type of people, or what people are you sending this to? So from TouchPoint's vantage point, we send to a lot of churches, and we have to keep in account when are these staff members typically in office? Because there are days like Fridays, they typically take off because they might be working a day on the weekend. So I think if you know your audience, take that into account of what day are they most likely to be there? When are they most responsive with when you're speaking to them outside of sending mass emails? And then time of day, it also is really dependent on who your audience is. And I know this isn't exactly how you wanted this question to be asked, but you know, if, like I said earlier, like if it's a newsletter, maybe you want someone to right after lunch be able to open that and kind of digest that information. You know, 1 p.m., that might be your time. If it's information that you want them to have sort of earlier in the day, then you might want to send that over at 9 a.m. So it's truly dependent on the content and dependent on the recipients.
Yeah, I'll add one thing. This was probably the #1 question, Jamie, that I used to ask when I used to work for one of the churches that now I get the pleasure to serve on the other side at TouchPoint. And we would always ask, when is the best time to send an email? And, you know, there were various studies that said, send your emails at 10 a.m. on Tuesday morning. Well, then every organization sent their emails at 10 a.m. on Tuesday morning, and then it's no longer the best time to send your email. And so now that everybody's sending emails, there's really not a best time. And I would say, you know, Katie hit it on the head. You want to understand your constituents and figure out what is best for them. And there are times that you want to avoid, right? Like, I wouldn't send emails in the middle of the night, you know, unless you're serving a lot of, like, you know, on-call ER doctors or something like that. Maybe that could be the perfect time to send to them, but it's probably rare that you would send it in the middle of the night. You know, things like that, there's obvious things like that, but there's not necessarily a perfect or best time anymore.
So one last question came in from Will. Will asks, just generally, if I can paraphrase, what are some good examples of good segmentation practices? You know, we talked a little bit about segmentation. I have a few thoughts. Chris and Katie, do you want to jump in on that?
Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, this is why I think it's important to have the way that you can send your emails being really closely tied to your CRM, or your, in our case, your church management system sending it instead of using a third-party tool, because that CRM or that CHMS is where you have all kinds of data about the person, right? And so as soon as you start sending email through a third-party tool, then you lose everything you know about that person, and it's harder to segment. So that's one key. You know, I would say it really depends on the organization. It depends on kind of what you're sending out, but anywhere you can segment, I would encourage you to segment. The giving example is a perfect one. Everybody kind of sends out a year-end giving appeal or quarterly giving updates, things like that. I would say don't send one of those. Send 5, or maybe if you're sending one right now, the next one that you send, whether it's a quarterly giving or a year-end, maybe set a goal to send 3. And what I mean by that is not sending, if your mailing list is 1,000 people, don't send 3,000 emails. Send 3 emails of maybe 300, 500, and 200, right, to various people. And then the next year, see how the different responses went, and then see if you can break those down even more. So the next year, maybe instead of doing 3, maybe try to send 5 or 10, and just continue to refine and tailor those communications. And I think you'll see a huge difference.
Yeah, one thing that we talk about a lot at TouchPoint is past behavior is a great indicator of future behavior. So we keep kind of going back to that giving example, because that's a really common example. But also things like registration. If camp is coming up for parents, who do we want to, or for parents to register, who do we want to send that to? Well, obviously people who have registered in the past, because they're most likely to come again in the future. And we might have a different message for them. Hey, it's that time of year again, to come back together. We might have that message for those folks, but then for someone who's never done it before, the message might be a little bit different. It might be, hey, come experience something new, try something new at summer camp this year. So just those little tweaks in the messaging go a long way to getting people to click on that call to action. So that's all that I would really add to that. So
yeah, Andrew, you mentioned people that have done things in the past, right? Invoking memories. So if there was something really special from that past year's event, maybe there's a picture that captures that, or a quote, or some kind of a video clip. Invoking that memory might help add relevance, remind somebody of how special or important that event was, and lead to a better engagement or call to action. So, but that same memory might fall on deaf ears to the person who's never engaged. And so I love the example of like, try something new, or so maybe a challenge, right? Or there's lots of different creative ways that you can engage.
All right, so I think we've covered all the questions. We got a couple more minutes here. We have some free resources. Katie, you want to talk about the free resources?
So we do have a few free resources on our TouchPoint website, and you can go ahead, and if you would like to look through any of these, you can just go straight to our website and toggle through onto the tab, that resources tab, or just type in touchpointsoftware.com/resource, and it'll send you right there. And then if you would like to follow us on any of our social medias, this is what they are.
And lastly, we just want to thank you all for participating today. We had some great questions. Hopefully we delivered some content that's relevant, engaging, and important to you all. I believe the recording of this, that was a question. I believe that will be available, right, Heather? And so if you want to share this with other people in your organization, we would love for you to do that. If you want to learn more about TouchPoint, we'd love to engage with you. I know CLA serves a very diverse group of people, and not all of you work for churches, but many of you either serve or engage with your church. So if your church is not being served well through your technology partners, we would love to engage with you. Our heart is to serve the church well and bring these best practices to our churches so that they can spread the good news and share the gospel of Jesus Christ. So any ways that we can help with that, we would love to engage with you. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.